Where is the passbook? Let me manage it.
After I was hospitalized with cancer and forced into a battle for my life, Greg said that to me. He had a triumphant smile, making it clear he was up to no good with the passbook in hand. Well then, I'm entrusting you with $500,000. With that, I told him where the passbook was kept. It wasn't because I thoughtlessly trusted him, simply because we were married. I had a plan to thoroughly get revenge on Greg. When I went home to pick up some things, what I found on the table was a divorce agreement. As expected, the passbook was gone. With this, it all went according to the plan successfully. To anyone, this situation would seem utterly hopeless, but this was the beginning of a tale of revenge. My name is Sophia Hill, a housewife in my 40s. I live with my husband Greg. Initially, Greg and I had no trouble building a marital relationship, but now the bond between us has completely cooled down. The primary cause of the deterioration was Greg's true nature. Greg had a deceptive personality, presenting himself as a kind, considerate husband for the first 2 months of marriage. However, after those 2 months passed, Greg showed his true colors. Hidden beneath was a domineering character, trapped in the fixed idea that a wife should always honor her husband. Every day I was subjected to a barrage of verbal abuse from Greg.
I am the man of the house, and the wife is supposed to always obey the man of the house. That's why you should listen to everything the husband says.
This became his mantra, and if I failed to fulfill even one of Greg's demands, I would be berated with,
"You can't even listen to your husband. You're a failure as a wife."
For instance, the laundry was to be done with Greg's items first, then mine. Despite it being more economical to wash everything together in terms of water usage, Greg stubbornly insisted.
It's unacceptable to wash my things with yours. What if they start to smell?
As if my laundry was somehow smelly, and he refused to let them be washed together. Moreover, Greg was fastidious about cleaning. His room always had to be prioritized and kept clean every day. If even a speck of dust was found in Greg's room, he would command,
"Hey, there was dust in my room. Clean it now,"
demanding vacuuming and dusting for just a speck of dust, regardless of the time, wasting my time. Furthermore, if I served something Greg disliked at mealtimes, he would absolutely refuse to eat it. While managing his preferences could have been manageable, Greg was capricious, rejecting even his favorite foods on a whim.
It's the wife's job to always serve what the husband wants to eat. You're a failure as a wife if you can't even do that.
His demands were reckless and unreasonable. I may be Greg's wife, but I'm not his mind reader or anything like that. If he didn't want to eat something because he wasn't in the mood, he could have simply told me, "I want to eat this," and I could have prepared it. However, Greg never did that, making it even more challenging to prepare meals that suited his mood. I was frankly fed up with Greg's immature whims. I felt it was impossible to keep up, and I was aware that fulfilling all his whims was utterly unfeasible. Yet every mistake I made would sour the atmosphere at home, worsening my relationship with Greg, so I couldn't simply ignore all his demands. Being forced into such a life, it was unsurprising that the strain would eventually take its toll. Eventually, while doing housework, I lost consciousness. A loud thud was heard, and our concerned neighbor contacted the building manager, who found me collapsed inside and called an ambulance. After being taken to the hospital and regaining consciousness, I was immediately admitted for tests. I hoped for nothing serious, but my hopes were dashed. I had developed cancer. I don't know if it was because of my illness, but I suddenly felt dizzy. The dizziness was so severe that I couldn't stand up. I ended up sitting down on the spot, and a nurse supported me. After that, the doctor advised me to contact my family. Of course, I contacted my parents' house as well. However, my mother passed away a few years ago, and my father, who is in need of care, is being taken care of by my brother and his wife. Moreover, the place where my father and my brother's family live is so far away that it takes 3 hours by train, so it's utterly impossible for them to come immediately. Therefore, I contacted Greg, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message anyway, and also sent a text message, but it wasn't read. Greg has turned off notifications for messages from me, so it will probably take him a while to notice. I could have gone to the office to see him and talk to him about it, but the doctor did not recommend it, so I gave up. Then, a few hours later, I received a message from Greg.
I'll go to the hospital tomorrow, so wait.
That was it. Just a short text message. He didn't seem to worry about my condition. I wasn't even sure if he would really bring my belongings. Feeling even dizzier with Greg's lack of concern, I remembered that I had told him, I want you to bring my things today, because I would run out of clothes for today. Also, there are various things I need, like toiletries, that are left at home. I really needed him to bring them today. I mentioned this several times in messages, but still he hasn't read it. Feeling desperate, a few hours later, the message was read, and Greg replied with a single sentence.
Shut up, be quiet.
Despite my urgent message due to my hospitalization for cancer, his attitude was incredibly disappointing. Well, I hadn't had much expectation from Greg in the first place. Eventually, Greg did not come to the hospital that day. Though I knew it, I couldn't completely give up hope, making the first day of hospitalization even harder. The nurses looked at me with sympathy, which only added to my distress. As promised, Greg arrived at the hospital around noon the next day. As soon as he saw me, he laughed and said,
What? You look healthier than I thought. I thought you'd look weaker.
I couldn't help but get angry at him. Just hurry up and leave the stuff, I said, almost snapping at him. Greg tilted his head and said,
Oh, I didn't bring him any stuff, though.
What on earth did he come for then? Wasn't he supposed to come here to bring my things? Unable to contain my anger, I glared at Greg, and he seemed not amused and glared back.
What's with that look?
His attitude was so unreasonable that I wanted to say something, but I tried to keep my cool and asked him. Then why did you come here? If you're not bringing my things, there's no point. I asked, my voice filled with anger. Greg then said,
No, I came here for another reason.
Another reason? What could it be? As I tilted my head, not understanding, Greg seemed hesitant to speak. If you have something to say, just say it quickly. I've been sleep-deprived and anxious since yesterday, and Greg's irritating behavior was too much. When I pressed him to speak up, Greg chuckled and said,
Where is the passbook? Let me manage it.
So he came here to ask about where I put my passbook. That finally made sense. Greg hadn't come to visit me out of concern or to deliver my belongings. He came to take the passbook, to take control of it, and to use my savings for himself. I sighed deeply at Greg's self-centered thinking, even at a time like this. However, Greg seemed not to care, grinning smugly. I couldn't deal with him any longer. That's when I decided to act. Well then, there's $500,000, so please take care of it. Upon hearing this, Greg exclaimed in a mix of surprise and joy.
$500,000?
It should be noted that Greg is just an ordinary office worker, and before getting married, I was just an ordinary office lady. Greg hasn't been working in any job that could earn a large sum of money. So where did this wealth come from? The answer lies in the stock market, which I was introduced to by a friend after becoming a full-time housewife. While managing my household duties, I invested when I could afford to and had recently made a fortune in the stock market. Even so, I didn't have the desire to spend such a large amount of money immediately, so I decided to save it for future use. I had intended to keep the existence of this $500,000 a secret. After all, if Greg knew about it, it could lead to selfish actions on his part. But now I'm fueled by a desire for revenge. I've been itching to get revenge on Greg for all his selfish behavior and actions he has repeated over time. That's why it was necessary to reveal the existence of this $500,000. Greg was more surprised and flustered by the amount of wealth than he had anticipated. While smiling kindly at Greg, I said, "The passbook is in the third drawer of the cupboard. You're going to manage it, right?" Greg, who had been stunned until now, replied energetically,
"Oh, yes."
It seems he has fallen right into the trap.
"Then leave the rest to me."
With those words, Greg left the hospital room with a bounce in his step, probably intending to withdraw the deposited $500,000 with the passbook in hand. Unaware that he's fallen for such an obvious trap, Greg behaves as if everything is going according to his plan. Unfortunately, it's not going to be that easy for him. Luckily, today is a national holiday, and the bank service has already ended. And since Greg has work tomorrow, he probably won't be able to withdraw the money until tomorrow evening at the earliest. That gives me enough time to complete my plan for revenge. I talked to the doctor about wanting to retrieve some belongings, and I was able to secure permission to go out during the day tomorrow. In other words, I'll execute my revenge tomorrow during the day. I couldn't wait. The next day, as planned, I decided to go home to retrieve my belongings. However, going to retrieve my belongings was just a means to get permission to go out. I had another purpose. Despite being away for only a day, I missed my home terribly. Greg was at work and not at home. Upon entering the house, I found 2 pieces of paper on the living room table. One was a divorce application, and the other appeared to be a note.
Sorry it's sudden, but let's get a divorce. Please fill out and submit the divorce application.
Checking the cupboard just in case, I found the passbook was gone, and I instantly understood that Greg had taken them. Normally, one might be dismayed at having such a large sum of money taken away. However, my lips remained curled in a smile. With this, it all went according to the plan successfully. I couldn't help but let those words slip out. If Greg had been there, he would have been furious, asking,
What do you mean by this?
I filled out the divorce application, gathered the necessary belongings for my hospital stay, and left the house I had lived in with Greg for many years. Of course, I submitted the divorce agreement on my way, severing all ties between me and Greg. I then returned to the hospital, prepared for my ongoing battle with my illness, and gathered information. By the end of the day, after completing all the tasks I needed to do, I noticed several missed calls on my phone, all from Greg. Furthermore, there were messages from Greg. Checking the messages, they were all consistent, asking,
Tell me how to withdraw the money.
Noticing that the messages had been read, my phone rang again. Not wanting to disturb my roommate, I moved to a common area where I could talk on the phone and called Greg back.
Sophia, finally you answered. I can't withdraw the money, please. Can you tell me how to do it?
Greg sounded more desperate than I had imagined. Probably he has an urgent need for the $500,000, but I have no obligation to extend a helping hand to such Greg. If you can't withdraw it, why not give up? When I coldly said that, Greg replied in a troubled tone.
Don't say such terrible things. We may have some disputes, but we're still married, right? I really think we should work together here.
Still married? Work together? What Greg is trying to do is far from honorable. He's just trying to deceive me to the very end for his own greed, hoping to savor the sweet fruits alone. There's no way I'd cater to such feelings from Greg. Are you having trouble because you can't withdraw the money? When I asked that, Greg responded,
Yes, that's right. I need $500,000 right now. Please do something.
It seems Greg has a situation where he urgently needs $500,000. Even though he has the bank book, he can't withdraw the money when he goes to the bank. Thinking maybe he's doing something wrong, Greg contacted me to find out how to withdraw it. According to Greg, that was the situation.
Please help me.
Greg's voice was weaker than I had ever heard it. It almost made me want to laugh, realizing how cornered he felt. Time to confront Greg with reality. You're doing it right. It's just that the bank book you have now can't be used to withdraw anymore. When I said that, Greg exclaimed,
What?
In a high voice.
What do you mean? If I have the bank book, I should normally be able to withdraw, right?
Greg's point was valid. However, the bank book Greg currently possesses is no longer usable. Because I filed a theft report this afternoon, so that bank book means nothing now. It's completely useless now. Hearing my words, Greg was probably stunned into silence, not saying anything. Yes, I had stopped by the bank on my way back in the afternoon to file a theft report, because Greg had taken the bank book without my permission and was trying to make my hard-earned $500,000 his own. This act could only be described as theft. It was only natural to take appropriate action in response. The bank book Greg took out can no longer be used as a tool to withdraw my $500,000. Moreover, having divorced and lose the relationship of being spouses, excuses like because we're spouses are no longer valid. Greg can never get the $500,000 he thought he would. Amused beyond belief, I asked Greg with a chuckle, "How does it feel to be tricked by the woman you looked down on?" "I don't know what you wanted to use the $500,000 for, but in such a situation, I'm not foolish enough to hand over such a large sum of money to someone like you." When I said that, Greg raised his voice in a wary tone.
Stop it already. Stop mocking me. I need $500,000 right now. Please, I'll do anything. Just give me the $500,000. Please.
Greg was begging desperately. However, no matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't come up with a reason on why Greg would suddenly need $500,000. Why do you even need $500,000? What have you done? Since it was eerily unclear, I asked him, and Greg began to explain bit by bit. 2 days ago, upon learning that I had an inheritance of $500,000, Greg, without thinking, quit his job on the spot. Then, unbelievably, he squandered large amounts of money on gambling, which he had previously only dabbed in with his allowance. His total debt amounted to $300,000. Despite the amount being impossible to repay immediately, the circumstances of his borrowing were such that if he could not show a way to repay within a week, it was unclear what would happen to Greg afterward. However, Greg had a bank book with $500,000 deposited in it. Thinking he could just withdraw the money and solve the problem, Greg continued to live extravagantly without any particular urgency. But when he went to the bank counter this evening, despite having the bank book, he couldn't withdraw the $500,000. Without the $500,000, who knows what would become of Greg? Deciding this was an urgent matter, Greg, who had left the divorce papers and stolen the bank book, shamelessly contacted me like this.
Please help me. If things continue this way, who knows what will happen?
Panic was evident in Greg's voice. There was undoubtedly no lie in his story. Greg's sheer foolishness made me sigh deeply. Blinded by the sight of a large sum of money, Greg did something utterly unthinkable. Spending $300,000 in just 2 or 3 days is nothing short of madness. Despite the terrible way he had treated me, if I were the same person who had always forgiven him and lived a modest life with Greg, I might have extended a helping hand to him. Unfortunately, the person listening to Greg now is someone whose love for him has completely cooled off, just a stranger to him. No matter how much Greg pleads, I feel no pity for him, and I find myself laughing at his self-inflicted troubles. Yet Greg still hasn't given up the hope, clinging desperately.
Please help me. You're the only one I can turn to.
It was incredibly annoying to me. All I wanted was to get rid of this thorn in my side and focus on my battle with illness. After all, it was Greg's actions that led to this situation. If he had cared for me, brought my belongings on the day itself, and acted like a caring husband, I might not have kept all $500,000 to myself and would have shared some with him. Greg himself threw that chance down the drain. Sorry, but I have no intention of giving you the $500,000, nor do I plan to help you. After all, it's all your own doing. You were never a caring husband to me, and now you're trying to play the husband card and ask for help? That's cowardly. I said sharply without mercy, and he returned with convenient words.
Don't say such terrible things. We might be ex-spouses, but we were still married, right? We're just divorced. The bond we've shared over the years can't just disappear with a single divorce paper, can it?
What was he talking about? He was nothing but a burden. Greg tries to twist the situation to his advantage with excuses. I found it unbearable to even spend time responding to him. No matter what you say, I absolutely will not give you the $500,000. Greg, sounding even more desperate, replied.
Please, Sophia, I'm begging you. Help me. You're the only one I can turn to. If you abandon me, I don't know what will happen to me.
As if I was the one to blame. Clearly, it was Greg's fault all along. If Greg hadn't recklessly splurged, this future wouldn't be his. If Greg hadn't been blinded by money and discarded me, he wouldn't be facing this end. Stop making excuses. You reap what you sow. Now deal with it yourself. Goodbye. With that, I hung up. Greg called several times after that, but I blocked his number, ensuring he could never contact me again. The divorce papers were properly submitted, so now Greg and I were officially strangers. Finally free, I embraced my new life and fought against my illness. It took a long time, but my cancer was cured, and I was discharged from the hospital. Later, I heard from friends that Greg's whereabouts have been unknown since then. Apparently after that, Greg desperately reached out to his parents and friends, attempting to borrow money in any way he could. However, due to the sudden need for $300,000 and Greg's frantic behavior, those around him grew suspicious and refused to lend him any money. In other words, Greg was unable to pay the borrowed $300,000. Where Greg is and what he's doing now is unknown, but he's probably suffering more than if he were in hell. I could genuinely laugh and say, serves him right. As for me, after recovering from cancer, I moved out of the house I shared with Greg to a new place, living a relaxed life while working from home. Fortunately, I have assets, so I won't be struggling with money. Friends sometimes ask if I'm not looking for a new love, but recalling the hellish life with Greg, I've had enough of marriage. Now I want to live a peaceful life on my own.
I'm remarrying a 23-year-old heiress. Poor people on welfare disappear. Haha.
3 days after we started living apart, I met John. Standing next to him was a young, beautiful woman. She intertwined her arm with John's and seemed to be on guard against me. However, I recognized that woman. Have we met before? Could I be mistaken? As John hurled terrible words at me, I desperately tried to figure out the woman's identity. Then, could it be? I remembered how I came to know this woman, and then the woman's true identity came back to me. At the same time, I couldn't help but burst into laughter.
Hey, what are you laughing at? That's creepy.
Sorry. It's just that the identity of this woman is someone I know. My name is Alice Johnson, 32 years old, single. I have been working as a nursery teacher, a job I've dreamed of since I was a student. Despite the pressures from my superiors and dealing with parents, I find solace in the smiles of the children and I'm motivated to work every day. Above all, being a nursery teacher was my aspiration. Quitting was not an option for me. Though my workplace may change, I plan to continue working in this profession until retirement. That's what I thought. However, life has taught me that things don't always go as planned. One day, invited by a friend, I attended a mixer where I met John, a man 3 years my senior. John seemed to be an executive at a well-known company around here. He achieved great results and became an executive in his 20s. People would call someone like him an elite. However, far from boasting about his career, he was a very humble man. Wow. An executive in your 20s. That's amazing.
Not really. There were quite a few others like me.
Still, it was impressive to the outside world. Since John and I were seated next to each other, our conversation flowed as if we weren't strangers. Following that, we exchanged contact information and started meeting up. After a few meetings, our relationship developed into dating. After 3 years of dating, we got married. During our relationship, John was always very kind to me. He would plan our dates and gave me wonderful gifts, not just on special occasions. Thank you, John.
I just want to see you happy.
He would say such cheesy lines, and I was swayed by every word. I felt fortunate to have met such a wonderful person. However, at that time, I didn't know John's true character. After marriage, my life changed dramatically. It all started when John suggested I quit my job as a nursery teacher. What? Why? I had intended to continue working even after marriage. John had seemed to agree with this.
Please. My mother's also said it would be better.
Your mother has nothing to do with our life, right?
Of course she does. She says she'd support our life. Besides, why do you want to work so much? We can live on my income alone.
That's not the point. Indeed, we could live on John's income alone, but I was reluctant to quit being a nursery teacher. In the end, I gave in after our discussion. We had talked about wanting children in the future, and we concluded that it might be better for me to stay home to prepare for that more comfortably. It seemed his mother had suggested the same, so I reluctantly decided to quit my job as a nursery teacher. Following John's request, we also moved closer to his parents' house. According to John, having our houses close would make it easier to receive support. was better than living together, at least. I thought and accepted the move. I regretted not discussing our married life while we were dating, but that's a secret. I would have happily accepted it if his mother had a good personality. However, his mother's personality was, to put it mildly, not good. Her comments looked down on me, and her scrutinizing gaze was unbearable. I had hoped that marrying John and starting our life together would mean less interaction with his mother, but I was sorely mistaken. Once we moved close by, his mother began visiting our house daily. Perhaps she disliked being alone as my father-in-law had passed away.
Alice, what's with all these frozen food packages?
She would inspect every corner of the house during her visits, even peeking into the trash can. Hey, you don't need to go through that.
You're not making my son take lunches filled with frozen food, are you?
I used some frozen food, but it's not all like that.
You're a stay-at-home wife now. How can you not make a lunch from scratch? Do you plan to feed our future children frozen food too? I can't believe I got such an unbelievable daughter-in-law.
I'm sorry. Am I not allowed to use frozen food now that I'm a stay-at-home wife? Indeed, I ultimately chose this path for myself. However, it was never something I truly wanted. After, the mother-in-law said her piece and left satisfied. All I could do was let out a sigh. Day after day, my mother-in-law would come over just to complain and then leave. There were times she came over when I wasn't home and would say,
"Where are you? I came all this way. Hurry back and let me in."
She seemed to enjoy tormenting me, using me as an outlet of her stress. Though I've tried to refuse her visits, getting angry every time is exhausting. Eventually, I became cautious, even just going to the convenience store nearby. However, one thing my mother-in-law kept repeating like a mantra was,
"When will you have children?"
She pressured me about having children every time we met. We haven't been able to yet.
What? Are you joking? You must be infertile.
Such insensitive comments were her way of blaming me entirely for not having children. According to her, it was all my fault, and John could never be at fault. Yet John continued to be kind to me, considering our challenge with pregnancy as something we should tackle together. He often cared about my health.
We don't need to rush the kids. I mean, I'd love to give my mom a grandchild, but you're more important to me, okay?
Yeah, thank you. We believed that, with mutual support, we would eventually be blessed with children. However, my hopes never materialized. 2 years later, we still hadn't had any children. By then, my mother-in-law seemed to have given up on the idea of grandchildren and stopped visiting. Simultaneously, John's behavior towards me worsened, and he began to verbally abuse me freely. Perhaps it was the stress of not having children. Or maybe he just started to dislike me. The more I thought about it, the more my thoughts spiraled negatively. But John seemed unconcerned with how I felt.
Hey, where's dinner? Why isn't it ready yet?
Oh, sorry. It'll be ready soon.
Ugh, you're so useless. Can't cook, can't clean, can't get pregnant. My mom was right to be disgusted. Why did I end up with someone like you?
I'm sorry. I no longer had the energy to fight back, and I just kept apologizing to John. Seeing me like this only encouraged him to berate me further. Complaints about the food being bad, the cleaning not thorough, even a single hair out of place could trigger a scolding. And after hurling insults at me, he would always say,
"This is why you can't get pregnant."
I did my best to maintain a healthy diet and lifestyle. I measured my body temperature, kept track of my menstrual cycle, and paid more attention to these things than I did when we first got married. Still, pregnancy eluded us. By this point, John would often refuse to try. I understood he was busy or tired, but if he was going to complain about not having children, shouldn't he be willing to cooperate? If you're going to say that, then cooperate. It's not something I can solve on my own.
What? Shut up. Haven't I told you enough times? I'm tired.
No matter how much I tried to reason with him, John would only say he was tired and showed no signs of willingness to help. If John wasn't going to cooperate, there was nothing I could do. Whenever I had a moment to myself, I couldn't help but wonder how things had come to this. I found myself wondering if this was the kind of marital life I had envisioned. I couldn't help but think that the relationship between John and me had grown so cold. Perhaps it could never be restored. 6 months later, our relationship had further deteriorated. John had stopped coming home altogether. The reasons given were sudden overtime work or drinking parties. On weekends, he claimed to have work, spending little time at home. I suspected he had given up on me and was having an affair. If only he would just say he wanted a divorce. In the end, I had no choice but to live a lonely life at home. On the rare occasions John did come home, he only had harsh words for me.
Why do you always look so miserable? It's disgusting.
I'm sorry. Where had the John I married gone? He wasn't someone who would say someone else was disgusting. All I could do was try not to upset him further, always apologizing. However, one day after finishing shopping for dinner and returning home, I found John unusually at home. What's going on?
Oh, Alice, you're finally back.
John spoke cheerfully, which made me wary of his intentions. As I braced myself for what he might say next, he handed me a document. It was a divorce form. Divorce?
Yeah, I have no use for you anymore. There's no point in us being a couple anymore. Go ahead, become homeless or live on welfare.
I see. The clear statement that he had no use for me filled me with sadness, but at the same time, I felt a sense of relief knowing I could finally escape this life. Understood. I accepted the divorce without hesitation, which seemed to surprise John slightly. I signed the divorce papers and handed them back to him. At that moment, I felt a sense of liberation, taking a deep breath. John told me to leave by the next day, so I went back to my room to pack the essentials. The next day, while John was at work, I left the house and headed to my parents' house. I had informed my parents, but understandably, they were worried about me actually returning home.
You can stay at home as long as you need. There's no rush for anything.
Encouraged by my mother's words, I resolved to start afresh from tomorrow. 3 days after the divorce, my heart was still healing, but I knew I had to move forward. First, I began looking for a job, browsing job listings in magazines and online. Due to staff shortages, there were many openings for nursery teachers, my former profession. I considered returning to that role, saving several job listings that caught my interest. When I looked at the clock, it was past 4 p.m., an hour since I started my job research. Deciding to take a break, I went out for a walk with no particular destination in mind, just wanting to stroll. I reminisced about walking this route to school or working part-time at the supermarket. Memories flooded back. However, as I decided to head home after about 30 minutes of aimless wandering, I saw a familiar figure. John?
What? Alice?
There in front of me was John, accompanied by a young and beautiful woman, much younger and prettier than either John or me. She had her arm intertwined with John's, looking at me warily.
Why are you here?
That's my line. Why are you here?
Shut up. It's none of your business.
John refused to answer my question.
Hey, John, who's this woman?
Oh, she's my ex-wife. Don't worry about her, Amelia.
Ex-wife? Ew.
The woman named Amelia twisted her body, trying to act cute, but she just came off as overly flirtatious. However, I felt another emotion upon seeing Amelia. It felt like I had seen her somewhere before. Have we met? And who is this woman?
My current wife. My mom introduced us.
What? Wife?
Yeah, haha.
Had he really remarried just 3 days after our divorce? My mind went blank. Then Amelia revealed a shocking fact.
We're expecting a baby in a few months.
A baby? Considering the size of Amelia's belly, she seemed to be more than half a year pregnant. That timeline overlapped with when John started not coming home. They must have been involved since then.
Anyway,
looking at Amelia's face, John reinforced the reality.
I'm remarrying a 23-year-old heiress. Poor people on welfare disappear. Haha.
John said with a dirty laugh, which Amelia echoed with a high-pitched giggle. I'm not on welfare.
Shut up. Stop pretending.
They laughed again, leaving me feeling miserable and close to tears. But then looking at Amelia's face, I realized something. The familiarity I felt, the fact that Amelia was an heiress, everything clicked. At the same time, my tears receded and I burst into laughter. My sudden laughter made them step back.
Oh, what's she laughing at? So creepy.
This is too much. Can we go now?
Disgusted by me, they quickly left the scene. The reason I laughed at Amelia was because I knew her true identity. Indeed, Amelia was the daughter of an affluent family. However, her family's wealth was not from successful ventures. In fact, Amelia's parents' company was on the brink of bankruptcy, nearly collapsing. I had read about Amelia being introduced as an heiress with her photo in job sites and magazines a little while ago. It's rare for a wealthy family to advertise their daughter like that, which struck me as odd and memorable. Further research revealed the company was close to bankruptcy, with various forums and review sites indicating dire financial straits. Bankruptcy seemed imminent. That's the family Amelia came from. This could work to my advantage. Seeing John happy and the fact that his mother introduced Amelia, something inside me crumbled as I watched their charade unfold. I'm committed to revealing the truth to them with my own hands. They might be happy now, but I'll ensure they plummet to the depths of misery. With that resolve, I took action. The first thing I did to bring them down was to offer them a direct apology. A few days after encountering John again, I contacted him, apologizing for my laughter and expressing my wish to give a gift for the baby's birth. Initially wary, John accepted my request after sensing my regret. However, this was all part of my strategy. I had considered seeking compensation from John and Amelia through a lawyer, but I lacked solid evidence. So I pretended to be remorseful, inviting them to spill everything about their relationship and the baby, planning to record it all and submit it to a lawyer. A week later, I was in a cafe near my parents' house waiting. John and Amelia arrived 10 minutes late.
Oh, sorry.
They sat down without a hint of remorse, still entwined and flaunting their affection. I'm sorry for suddenly reaching out. I've been thinking about how rude I was last time. I wanted to apologize. Also, your baby will be born soon, right? Could I give something for the baby?
Really? Wow, you're so thoughtful.
Unaware of my intentions, John and Amelia were delighted. Good, just like that. By the way, I heard you two met through mother-in-law, right? I'd love to hear more about it. As I said this, I discreetly started recording on my smartphone.
Oh, you want to hear? Can't help it then.
As John started to boast, Amelia gazed at him adoringly. To outsiders, it might seem like an innocent love story, but the reality was far from it.
It was really tough back then,
Yeah, but I'm so happy to be with John now.
John, with his arm around a younger woman, was frankly disgusting. They fell right into my trap, eagerly sharing how much they loved each other, all of it recorded. So, you're happy to have remarried a younger woman?
Of course. I'm truly happy every day, right, Amelia?
Yes, so happy.
Their lovey-dovey talk lasted over an hour. Keeping a smile and nodding was hard, but the more they comfortably shared, the more it worked in my favor. 3 hours later, we all went our separate ways. Back home, I reviewed the recordings. Everything was clearly captured. I contacted a law firm I had in mind. After ending the day's activities, I lay in bed, unable to shake the image of John and Amelia's happy faces. Recalling them made John seem happier than he ever was with me. When did he start to dislike me? I realized I had only seen the good in John before our marriage. 2 weeks later, I called them to a nearby station under the pretense of showing them the actual baby gift. Like before, they arrived arm in arm after about 10 minutes.
You're really going all out to see the actual gift, aren't you? After looking so sad, you're actually blessing us, huh?
Yeah, that's so nice.
It is nice.
The two of them were still arm in arm, looking cozy and affectionate with each other, but their happiness would only last up to this point. Shall we go? I led them into a taxi. Our destination was a law firm. Unaware of anything, John and Amelia continued to flirt in the taxi, showing a blatant disregard for public scrutiny that was almost impressive. Minutes later, the taxi arrived at the law firm. The love-struck pair followed me without any suspicion, but John soon realized something was amiss.
Hey, what is this place?
he exclaimed loudly, but it was too late. We were ushered into a conference room by the receptionist.
Did you trick us?
What's going on?
Her loud protests were silenced by the attorney present. Did you really think I was going to give you a baby gift? Thanks for coming so willingly.
What?
As they sat down, flustered, the lawyer explained what was happening and why I had taken such actions.
You're really the worst. What's wrong with you?
But we're already divorced, right? Compensation should matter.
You can still claim compensation within 3 years of divorce, you know. All those lovey-dovey stories you told me at the cafe were recorded and submitted. The fact you were cheating hasn't changed.
You.
John sighed heavily and slouched in his chair, but he sat up quickly when the lawyer mentioned the amount of compensation.
$15,000? Impossible.
I can't pay that.
Oh, can't pay? Why not ask your parents? Amelia looked displeased at my suggestion. Ah, but that might be difficult. Your parents' company is about to go bankrupt, isn't it? No money there.
Bankrupt? What do you mean? The company was doing well.
John, who had been kept in the dark, widened his eyes in shock at Amelia. Realizing she could no longer hide the truth, Amelia's demeanor changed as she started to reveal everything.
So it's all out then. No need to hide anymore. Yes, my parents' company is on the verge of bankruptcy. I've been planning to milk this old man for all he's worth since we met, given the business was already failing. Never thought I'd get pregnant.
You? Calling me an old man?
What, just realizing now? I never wanted to marry someone like you. But since I got pregnant, I had no choice. Seriously the worst. I can't stand it anymore. I want a divorce as soon as possible.
Amelia laughed loudly, her persona completely transformed. Shocked by Amelia's true nature, John was visibly distressed.
So you've been thinking that about me all along.
Tired of pretending. Now that it's come to this, I'm leaving you. Can't stand living with an old man like you.
Amelia.
The couple, who had appeared so happy moments ago, crumbled effortlessly. While I hadn't known Amelia's true feelings towards John, orchestrating this meeting had satisfied me, as it led to the outcome I desired. In the end, they agreed to pay the compensation in a lump sum. Amelia paid promptly, but John's payment was delayed. I had expected a quick transfer from John considering his salary and started to worry he might be trying to escape his responsibility. However, that concern was resolved a month later when John called me. As soon as I answered the phone, he said,
"Help me."
It turned out that John's affair had been discovered at his company, making his position there untenable, and he ultimately chose to resign. But he had spent almost all his savings on gifts for Amelia and now found himself without any money. Since he had divorced Amelia, he had no one to turn to.
Hey, what if we got back together? I don't have any money to pay the property division. Amelia ran off with another man and I heard her company went bankrupt. I don't know what to do anymore.
He made this call with a voice that sounded almost tearful, but of course I had no intention of getting back together with him. Get back together? Don't make me laugh. You're running off with that woman, having no money. That's none of my concern. If you hadn't done something stupid in the first place, none of this would have happened, right? Take responsibility. After I sharply responded, John didn't say anything and just hung up. The next day, whether he borrowed money or not, the full amount I had demanded was deposited into my account. After that, I never heard from John again. Now I'm living at my parents' house, having started working as a nursery teacher again. Indeed, the smiles of children are radiant. The work environment is better than before, and I am enjoying my job every day. Being the one who was left, it was right to divorce John. I'm not thinking about getting married at all now. Just like I hoped years ago, now all I want is to continue working as a nursery teacher until retirement, living a healthy life.
What's with that look? Get away, you poor person with an annual income of $30,000. Your face is really scary. The envy of the poor is frightening. That's right. Since we're here at the municipal office, why don't the lowlifes just get welfare? The ones I happened to meet at the municipal office I was visiting for some errands were my ex-husband, Henry, and his wife, Katie. They continued to mock me together. They probably thought I would cry and go home, but I had no intention of giving in to them. Without being intimidated by their verbal abuse, I opened my mouth to respond to them. Huh? $30,000 is my monthly income, though? What? My comment made both of them raise their voices in surprise. An annual income of $30,000. I'm not the old Henry anymore. As I laughed loudly, Henry turned bright red in embarrassment and started to retort. The two of them continued to cling to me after that. I finally gave them the punishment they deserved. My name is Debbie Anderson, 50 years old. I am a divorcee currently running a cooking class. I married Henry Irving, my ex-husband, when I was 26 years old. And then I gave birth to our daughter, Brittany. We were just an ordinary family that could be found anywhere. Henry was a company employee, diligently working every day, but he was a bit short-tempered and prone to anger. He held male chauvinistic views, occasionally making derogatory comments about me and Brittany. However, one could say that his feeling of needing to be responsible because he was a man was stronger than anyone else's. In the beginning of our marriage, feeling his masculinity and reliability, our family lived a modest but happy life. I met Henry through an introduction by a senior at my company. My senior was worried about me because I hadn't had a boyfriend even after turning 25. Honestly, I wasn't very attracted to the idea of marriage. I had a stronger desire to work than to get married. But at that time, not many people thought like me, and many believed that quitting one's job for marriage was a woman's happiness. Moreover, every time my parents contacted me, they started talking about marriage. I was living away from my parents because of my job, and I had doubts about whether getting married would be a good way to reassure them. So, when I met Henry, I somehow started to see him as a marriage candidate. It seemed that Henry had similar concerns at that time. Everyone around me is getting married, and my parents keep nagging about marriage. Honestly, I'm not interested in marriage, but if I were to marry, I'd like it to be someone like you, Debbie. One day, Henry said that to me. We weren't deeply in love, but I thought that since Henry and I had similar views on marriage, we could be good partners for each other. And so, we decided to get married less than a year after meeting, but we really had no money. Both of us had been living alone before our marriage, so we had hardly any savings. Therefore, our wedding was really just a small meal with only close family members. We couldn't afford a new home, so Henry moved into the apartment where I was living, and that's how our married life began. Because of our financial situation, I intended to continue working after marriage. Henry had agreed to this before we got married, but once we were married, he started to express dissatisfaction with me working. It was sometime after we got married. So, when is Debbie going to quit her job? His words were like a bolt out of the blue. I responded in confusion. Huh? I plan to keep working. That's what we agreed on. Henry started to grumble his dissatisfaction in response to my words. But working, doesn't that make it look like my income isn't enough? Everyone else quits their jobs when they get married. You should do the same. It was such a reversal from our discussions before marriage that I wanted to ask, what was all that talk before we got married about? The sudden change in his stance was frustrating. I opened my mouth, a bit angry. Why? It's a fact that we have no money, right? You agreed to me continuing to work. But, my boss and manager think you've already quit. I can't tell them you're still working. I was dumbfounded. For some reason, Henry had told his superiors that I had quit my job. Nowadays, it's not unusual for both partners to work. But at that time, society wasn't as accommodating for working women as it is today. Henry, influenced by what others said, started to think it was odd for me to work and began to pressure me to resign. He even went as far as involving his parents, making it a family-wide opposition to my working. You'll have children eventually, right? It's pitiful to leave them in daycare and work. Just quit your job. Henry has told you the same, right? A woman taking care of the home is what works best. Despite living far away, my mother-in-law irresponsibly threw such words at me. I couldn't agree to quit my job until the end, but being cornered by everyone, I ended up having no choice but to stay home. However, that didn't mean Henry's salary increased. The decrease in income directly impacted our lives. All I could do was to cut down on living expenses. Because we had to live on just Henry's salary, we had to tighten our belts and practice strict budgeting. "This is all we have for dinner?" Before payday, Henry would force a smile upon seeing the frugal meals. "Can't help it. We're out of money for this month. But I'm working. I have to eat for both of us. I have to work for your share too." Sometimes, he would say that and take my side dish. Moreover, he would take money for his allowance from our living expenses, saying it was embarrassing to have no money outside. I couldn't discuss such embarrassing matters with anyone. Because Henry said not to tell anyone we had no money, I couldn't even borrow money from my parents. Of course, there was no way I could spend money on my own cosmetics or clothes, and the stress built up because Henry wouldn't allow me to work even in such circumstances. I was thinking it might be better to divorce now when Henry noticed and said, "If we have a child, you won't have to think about unnecessary things." He suggested making a child despite having no money. If I got pregnant under these circumstances, our household finances would be disastrous. I opposed it, saying it was too early, but eventually, I got pregnant, making it difficult to divorce or go to work. Still, I found our daughter Brittany very adorable. Fortunately, she grew up healthy without any major illnesses. As Henry aged, his salary increased a bit. It was still below average, but we got used to saving. Being a full-time housewife, I could attend all of Brittany's kindergarten and school events. Although we had endured a lot and made many sacrifices to get to this point, I finally felt relieved that we had achieved a normal life when one day Henry said, "Maybe it's about time you started working too? Staying cooped up at home will make you age faster." I was at a loss for words at Henry's casual remark. "What do you mean? When we were struggling with no money, you said it was shameful for me to work, and now you're telling me to work?" Henry got upset at my spontaneous reply. "What? You don't want to work? Being a full-time housewife is just laziness." I was shocked by his cruel words. It wasn't that I didn't want to work. I just couldn't stand his attitude and words. The wife of the chief who moved here recently works even though she's married and has kids. And she always looks so put together. And then there's you, Debbie. Don't you think you're pathetic? What kind of face was he making when he said that? Had he forgotten what he had told me? I had so much I wanted to say, but Brittany was nearby, so I held back with all my might. "I see. I'll find some work." I conveyed my frustration, and Henry seemed to smile as if he had one. Then I started working part-time in a nearby job. I worked as a cook in a supermarket. At that time, Brittany was in the upper grades of elementary school. She was still an elementary school student, though she had grown quite a bit. It was an age where I couldn't take my eyes off her, and I had to do household chores. On top of that, balancing work was quite challenging at first, and I was exhausted every day. Henry's attitude remained unchanged despite seeing my condition. "You're struggling over just a part-time job? Try to be more like me," he would say arrogantly every day. But working as a full-time employee and juggling work, housework, and childcare were entirely different. I used to work as a full-time employee and only had to take care of myself, and I don't remember being this tired. It's just a part-time job, but I have household chores too. Can you help a bit? Even just checking Brittany's homework would help, I said to Henry. But he was unwilling to cooperate. Homework? That's a mother's job. Then, at least washing the dishes. I'm tired from work, and you want me to do housework? Housework is a woman's job. No matter what I asked, he would push everything onto me, using the excuse that I was a mother or a woman. I gave up expecting anything from Henry due to his selfish behavior. Then, one day, after about 3 years of working, Brittany fell ill. At first, We didn't know the cause and went to several hospitals. Of course, I took time off from my part-time job during this period and was desperate for Brittany. But Henry's response was cold. She just doesn't want to go to school and is faking it, isn't she? Don't take time off from your part-time job. Your salary will decrease. He showed no concern for Brittany, who looked unwell, and continued drinking beer. Eventually, Brittany's illness was not life-threatening, but we had to visit the hospital for a while. Since I had been frequently absent from my part-time job and would need to take more time off, I couldn't burden them any further and eventually resigned. Henry was furious about this and started to berate me. Can't you even stick to a part-time job? It was only for 3 years? I feel bad about resigning. But it couldn't be helped. Couldn't be helped? You just wanted to go back to being a comfortable full-time housewife, didn't you? No matter how much I explained Brittany's condition and our situation, Henry didn't show any empathy. Instead, he continued to pressure me to work. Struggling with the situation and Henry's verbal abuse, I was desperate to do something. Then, one day, Brittany said, "Mom, I'm sorry you had to quit your job because of me." I was surprised. I knew Henry's words had reached Brittany, but I didn't realize it had made her think this way. Filled with regret and resolution, I knew I had to prove it wasn't Brittany's fault. "It's not your fault, Brittany. But I'm happy when you're at home. I want you to stay at home all the time, like before." Brittany. I thought about it and came up with the idea of working from home. But there wasn't much I could do. After much thought, I decided to start a cooking class at home. I had always been confident in my cooking skills. With my experience living alone and working as a supermarket cook, I had a wide range of recipes. Moreover, thanks to working at the supermarket for 3 years, I was able to obtain a cooking license. Thus, I was able to start the cooking class smoothly. Brittany was very pleased. However, Henry only ridiculed me. As if it's going to work out if you do it yourself. Who would want to pay to learn your level of cooking? Stop flailing around and go get a real job, Shudden. Henry constantly grumbled as I prepared for the class. Still, I didn't give up. Surely, if things went well, even Henry would change his mind. But it wasn't easy from the start. I searched for students, but they were hard to come by. Even those who came for a trial session rarely turned into repeat customers, playing right into Henry's narrative. As expected, Henry continued to mock me. "Just get a proper job already." He said it so easily, but considering Brittany's hospital visits and sudden illnesses, it wasn't that simple. Henry seemed to have no intention of accompanying Brittany to the hospital, making it difficult for me to go out and work. In the end, I continued the cooking class while wrestling with my thoughts. Then, after some time, a couple of students began attending my class regularly. "My family loves the dishes I learned from you, Debbie. My child is a picky eater, but they ate the dish you taught us. Such wonderful people." Furthermore, they brought friends along, and about a year after opening, my cooking class finally began to take off. Brittany was very happy, but Henry only looked on coldly. I could feel he still held disdain for me, but he became increasingly silent over time. About 5 years later, the cooking class was doing well, albeit slowly. Brittany's illness had resolved with growth, and she only needed an annual checkup. We were not wealthy by any means, but we lived happily without any problems. Contrary to this, my relationship with Henry only grew colder. I could clearly feel his displeasure with my success, and I had nothing more to say to him. I thought we could be good partners when we married, but things don't always go as planned. Yet, we were a couple that had come this far together. I thought we would continue to live out our days in this indifferent relationship until one day when high schooler Brittany came home from school with a troubled look. "What's wrong? Did something happen at school?" When I asked, Brittany solemnly began to speak. "I saw Dad walking with a woman I don't know." "Your dad? Someone from work? What about it?" "No. They were arm in arm, looking close." I felt the blood drain from my face upon hearing those words. I immediately understood it was an affair, but I wasn't shocked by the affair itself. I was pained that Brittany had to witness that scene and get hurt. It might be a misunderstanding. I'll talk to your dad about it. Okay. Sorry for bringing this up. No, thank you for telling me, even though it was hard. It's not your fault, so don't worry about it. I comforted Brittany with a smile, but I was seething inside. That night, sensing the mood, Brittany went to her room early. Brittany's going to bed already? That's early, Henry said carelessly. Later, after watching for a while, I broached the subject. By the way, Brittany said she saw you walking with a woman. Me with a woman? Must be a mistake. Henry responded with a forced smile, but I didn't miss the evasion in his eyes. Just tell me the truth, and I'll forgive you. I glared at him as I said this. There's nothing to tell, Henry stammered. But perhaps realizing he couldn't talk his way out of my gaze, he laughed offensively. Well, I am popular, after all. Maybe something like that happened. Don't be ridiculous. Brittany got hurt because of it? What were you thinking? What? I've been nagged about money forever. Turned the house into some cooking class or whatever. There's no place or comfort for me in this house, so what's wrong with seeking solace outside? I was speechless at his words. Yes, running a class at home might have been an inconvenience. Still, Henry and the students never crossed paths. Even after classes ended, he mocked, "Oh? No one came today? Not popular, huh?" I was cleaning up, yet he was too oblivious to people's presence to blame his discomfort on the cooking class. Moreover, our financial issues weren't new and were partly due to Henry. Yet, he used that as an excuse for his infidelity, hurting Brittany, which was unforgivable. However, the income from the cooking class wasn't enough for Brittany and me to live on. Knowing I had no choice but to endure, Henry said, "If you're unhappy, let's get divorced. I've been continuing this marriage thinking of you, but marrying her might be for my happiness." Wait. Brittany's school fees are coming up. Earn it with your cooking class or whatever. So, it's settled then. Divorce. Henry said that and actually brought home divorce papers the next day. I was discarded. Not just me. Henry abandoned his own daughter, Brittany, as well. I negotiated for child support, educational expenses, and even demanded compensation for his infidelity. Reluctantly, Henry agreed, so I consented to the divorce, but I never received any payments, starting another cycle of struggling with my bank account. Yet, even as a single mother, I never forgot to smile, supporting Brittany and living on together. It was a period of relentless effort, but the hardship didn't last forever. A few years after the divorce, my daughter Brittany, now a working adult living far away due to her job, decided to get married. She needed her family register copy for the marriage registration, so I went to the municipal office. That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Henry Irving, oh wow, isn't that the teacher?" A mocking tone. Turning to look, sure enough, there was Henry. "Are you still running that cooking class, ma'am?" His words, mixed with politeness, felt even more mocking. I abruptly turned away, only for the woman next to Henry to laugh. "Henry, that's rude. She's your ex-wife, right?" "Right." Thanks to her agreeing to the divorce, I could marry Katie. I should be grateful. Apparently, the woman next to him named Katie was the mistress Brittany had seen. She didn't seem the least bit remorseful for her actions as a mistress. Not only did she not pay any compensation, but she also didn't apologize. The woman looking down on me next to Henry looked wealthy. Involuntarily, my gaze was drawn to the brand name bag in her hand. Noticing this, Henry laughed even more mockingly. "Katie's parents own a company. You're envious of this bag, aren't you? You could never afford it in your lifetime, could you?" "I'm not envious at all. Pretending won't help. How much do you earn now?" About $10,000 a year? It seemed Henry had grown even more arrogant thanks to Katie's wealth. $30,000. I responded curtly. Huh, $30,000. Well, you're trying somewhat. But with an annual income of $30,000, you can't even afford decent food. Henry continued to loudly mock me. I wonder why he keeps pestering me like this. I glared at him sharply. What's with that look? A poor person with an annual income of $30,000 should disappear. Really, such a scary face. The envy of the poor is frightening. Since we're at the municipal office, why don't the lowlifes just get welfare? Katie joined in mocking me. They probably thought I would cry and go home, but I had no intention of giving in to them. Without being intimidated by their verbal abuse, I opened my mouth to respond. Huh? $30,000 is my monthly income, though? What? An annual income of $30,000. I'm not the old Henry anymore, I said loudly, laughing. As expected, Henry turned bright red and lashed out at me. What? Back then. You were always in the $30,000 range until we divorced. I really suffered marrying such a vain poor man. He hadn't expected a comeback. Trembling with anger, Henry looked utterly ridiculous. Now, you're married to a lady living off her parents' success. Lady? Katie seemed offended by my words, glaring at me. Yes. You're only a few years younger than me, right? It's ridiculous to be so dependent on your parents being the president of a company at your age. Do you even work? Faced with my question, Katie fell silent. Henry had nothing to say either. It seemed the two of them were living off Katie's parents without working. Realizing this, I couldn't help but laugh. It's sad for the parents to have to support a grown man and woman. What did you say? Henry almost raised his hand to me in anger. But he must have realized the consequences of such an action in a public place and reluctantly lowered his hand. A lying old woman like you has no right to talk about someone else's home. Oh, I'm not lying. Besides, you were the first to meddle in someone else's affairs, weren't you? How could a woman like you be earning $30,000 a month? I began to speak with a smile forming on my lips. Does Katie not cook at all? Cook? That's what the help is for. Don't lump me in with the poor. Our maid's truffle pasta is exquisite. The vegetables are from our company too. Katie laughed triumphantly, but my smile only grew wider. Is that so? What's with that creepy smile? I'm glad you like the dishes I came up with. At those words, both of them were taken aback. After divorcing Henry, I continued my cooking class. But the class alone wasn't enough to sustain a living. I decided to close down, but my students, not wanting me to quit, brought many new people. People called more people, and 3 months after the divorce, my cooking class became so popular that it was hard to get a reservation. We want more people to know about your cooking. Furthermore, a student who worked at a publishing company suggested I publish a cookbook. First, we published a cookbook for housewives. Thanks to these housewives spreading the word on social media, the book sold incredibly well, despite the era. In those challenging times, I also wrote a cookbook for toddlers, recalling the snacks I made with Brittany when she was in kindergarten, and a book on budget-friendly recipes from the days we struggled. Recently, I've even published books featuring slightly more upscale recipes, covering a variety of culinary genres. Among them, the recipe for pasta using mushrooms and truffle salt has spawned various adaptations and continues to buzz on social media. Katie's household help must have seen it and decided to try it out. I take pride in the fact that pasta isn't something a typical person would think of on their own. You came up with that? Yes, that's right. I'm glad so many people have enjoyed making it. Katie was speechless at my words. If she had made it herself, she might have recognized my name as the creator, but it seems she only boasted about dishes made by others. The fact that I was the one who created it never crossed their minds. They fell silent, probably realizing my monthly income of $30,000 wasn't a lie. Well, I'm quite busy, so? The bravado from earlier vanished. Leaving the disheartened pair behind, I finished my errand and left the municipal office. However, that evening, another incident occurred. Henry came to visit my home. Having continued my cooking classes after the divorce, I hadn't moved out of the apartment. Regretting not having moved, I reluctantly went to the entrance to greet Henry. About earlier, I'm sorry. Greeting Henry at the entrance, his smirking face gave me a bad feeling. What do you want? Well, you know, I supported and cooperated with your cooking class, right? We didn't divide our assets when we divorced, and I was thinking it's time to properly split the money now. My bad feeling was confirmed. Henry had come with the intention of claiming my money. What are you talking about? I don't recall any support from you. All I remember is being ridiculed. Support was the furthest thing from the truth. And asset division? What are you talking about? Come on. You have money, right? When we divorced, we're supposed to split it. We didn't do that, so let's divide our assets now. I was dumbfounded. What was he thinking? How could he think he had the right to my earnings? It was baffling. Oh, is Brittany here? She must be grown up by now. She'd want to see me, wouldn't she? Henry was still in a good mood, peering into the house as if expecting to see Brittany. I closed the door to block his view. Brittany isn't here. What? She lives far away now. She's getting married soon. Hearing this, Henry's eyes lit up. Part of me thought he might genuinely be happy for Brittany's happiness, while another part wondered if he had any paternal feelings at all. However, my thoughts were quickly dashed. The guy? Is he rich? Well, he's serious about his work, but... Lucky her. She got her looks from me, so it's easy for her to marry into money. Women have the escape route of marriage, which is nice, huh? I had to resist the urge to slap him. I had hoped and been let down too many times. Thinking he might have a shred of fatherhood, I was foolish. Henry had no sense of fatherhood. The wedding? I'll have to make sure I'm free. As if it was natural for him to attend, Henry stated his intention to be there. You'll have to ask Brittany about that, but if you want to meet her future husband, they're visiting this weekend. You could come by for a greeting. Henry nodded happily at my suggestion. He was supposed to come to pick up the family register copy and mentioned we could have a meal then. After saying he would come again, Henry left. I sighed as I watched his retreating figure. Then, the weekend arrived. For some reason, Henry brought Katie with him to our home. Katie was a complete outsider. Unsure of why she came, I let them in anyway. Brittany and her fiancé, James, who had arrived earlier, looked puzzled at the sight of them. Why is Dad here? And with her? It's been a while, isn't it harsh to greet me like that? You're getting married, right? Henry cheerfully spoke to Brittany, who looked at me with a questioning gaze. I smirked and addressed James. James, this is Brittany's father, my ex-husband Henry, and his current wife, Katie. Hello. Brittany had told him about her father and the circumstances of my divorce. It seemed James didn't have a high opinion of them either. James greeted them with a hesitant nod. I continued. You know, we didn't divide our assets when we divorced. I haven't received any compensation. Come on, let's not talk about that today. No, it's a good time. James is a lawyer, after all. Katie's here too, so I wanted to discuss this properly. Katie's eyes widened at my words. Looking for help, she turned to Henry. Brittany seemed to understand the real reason I had invited Henry today and smiled. Compensation. I've heard about the situation. Based on the cases I've handled so far, for your mother-in-law, it's feasible to expect at least $10,000. $10,000? Really? Katie exclaimed loudly, panicking. It's understandable. Being wealthy doesn't mean much if she doesn't earn her own money. She'd likely have to ask her parents for it. Henry spoke up, visibly irritated. Why not just deduct it from the asset division and give it to me? I couldn't help but burst into laughter at Henry's remark, and James looked on, puzzled. Asset division? I was informed that at the time of the divorce, your mother-in-law had virtually no money. She might not have had it then, but she has it now. Asset division pertains to property acquired during the marriage. James explained to Henry with a look of disbelief. Based on the divorce date, there was about $3,000 in savings. So, by simple calculation, you'd owe my mother-in-law $1,500. What? Things went as planned, and I felt a slight sense of relief. When we divorced, Henry took all our savings. Though it may not make a difference now, having that money back then would have significantly helped us. James, I'd like you to ensure the payment is made properly. Could you mediate for us? I formally requested James's assistance in front of them. Henry and Katie could only look at each other, turning pale. Later, a formal demand was made, but, as usual, no payment was forthcoming. However, I couldn't burden James or Brittany any longer. I decided it was time for the last resort. I've decided to terminate our contract. I notified the produce company I had been dealing with. Since publishing my book, I had entrusted all my vegetable needs to this company. Additionally, the meal kits using vegetables for my recipes were well received, contributing significantly to the company's revenue. It had been a mutually beneficial agreement. The reason for considering contract termination now was precisely because of Henry and Katie's actions. As expected, the company president and vice president came to see me immediately. Was there any mishap? The meal kits are still very popular, and we anticipate continued sales growth. Terminating the contract now would be. Both the president and vice president pleaded for contract continuation with troubled expressions. I'm grateful for your company's support and appreciate it. But I no longer wish to be involved. I firmly stated my position, causing both men to sweat as they searched for a reason. I then revealed the answer as if it were the final piece of the puzzle. To put it precisely, I no longer wish to be involved with Ms. Katie, the president's daughter and the vice president's sister. Indeed, the produce company I had been contracting with was Katie's family business. Of course, I was unaware of this initially. However, Katie's remarks about our company's vegetables and being the president's daughter led me to suspect. There aren't many produce companies around here. Reviewing the contract, I found Katie's name on the company's corporate registry. Katie, who claimed not to work, was clearly a nominal executive. Knowing the vice president had a sister and realizing the family connection, I was torn about how to handle this revelation. Despite ongoing insincerity from both Henry and Katie, it seemed unfair for me to continue obliging them. I disclosed the entire truth to the president and vice president. I can't believe. Katie's husband is Ms. Debbie Anderson. He did something so outrageous. Both were pale and profusely apologetic. I'm terribly sorry. We will remove Katie's name from the board of directors. Also, Dad, you need to take responsibility for spoiling Katie. Yes, that's true. Ms. Anderson, I am truly sorry for the trouble my daughter has caused. Following this, the president resigned. Katie's name was removed from the board of directors, and naturally, any financial support she had was cut off. That Debbie, running the cooking class here, is a damn old hag. An enraged Katie spent several days shouting this outside our apartment, which led to the entire incident being exposed on the internet. The produce company faced a difficult situation, but I decided to renew the contract, impressed by the vice president's character and response. He kept apologizing to me, but thanks to him, I was able to receive the compensation payment smoothly. What happened to Henry and Katie afterward goes without saying. Without work, the only thing awaiting them was a life of poverty. They were abandoned by their family and seemed to be living in a cramped apartment. I found out about this through a call from Brittany. Dad asked me for money. Of course, I said no. The shame of having to beg their daughter for money, unable to rely on anyone else. He's working at a day labor factory now. He should have never quit his job. Marrying that woman, he must have thought he became rich and got too carried away. Brittany said, laughing heartily. Her laughter allowed me to laugh as well. I had always been angered by Henry, but finally, it felt like he got his comeuppance. I know the hardships of living without money. Now, I want Henry to experience that hardship firsthand. I continued to work smoothly afterward. Now, encouraged by Brittany, I also post recipe videos on video sharing sites. Nothing makes me happier than knowing people find joy in my cooking. Brittany is expecting a baby soon. I'm thinking of creating a cookbook for delicious baby food recipes next.
How long are you going to live? I can't get the insurance money until you kick the bucket, huh? The husband, who had spent all the family's savings, said this. Can someone really say such a thing? Even if their love has cooled, to a wife who has been given only 6 months to live? I was beyond angry with my husband, who even boasted about spending that money on his mistress. I was completely disgusted with him. It's you who has a short time left, isn't it? What? My name is Christine, a 40-year-old working housewife. My husband, James, is 45 and took over his father's company, becoming its president. His mother serves as a chairman, and his father passed away about 5 years ago at the age of 70. He had an internal organ disorder, and the doctors said he had lived longer than expected. After his death, the company was taken over by his mother, who is now 75. But she is still energetic and effectively runs the company. The reason I know so much about my husband's company is that I worked there as an office worker. I used to work in fashion design until I was 38. I've always loved fashion, and it's not an exaggeration to say I worked hard to dress beautifully. Makeup, clothes, bags, women can shine with all these things. That's why I wanted to create clothes that can make any woman shine. I worked hard with that in mind. But I am also a woman. It would be a lie to say I didn't want to get married. It was tough considering my age, but I knew I couldn't change my single status without doing anything. So I decided to participate in matchmaking to find a husband. That's where I met my husband. He was kind and well-mannered, and I fell for his personality. So after a year of dating, we got married. But I didn't know he was a president until he had been dating for half a year. People tend to approach me just because I am a president. That's why I kept quiet during the matchmaking. But I couldn't find the right time to tell you. Christine, I'm sorry for telling you so late. My husband wasn't trying to deceive me, and his lying due to his position was unavoidable. Rather, his sincerity in apologizing made me fall for him even more, and I decided to marry him. However, as soon as we got married, he showed his true colors. While we were dating, he used to say, "Let's both keep working hard. Christine, I want you to do the job you love." But a few months into our marriage, he changed his tune. How long are you going to work? You were supposed to help out with the office work at my company, weren't you? Everything is ready arranged with my mother, so hurry up. He practically forced me to quit my job. I had no choice but to quit my job because if I didn't, he would become uncontrollable and violent. To settle things peacefully, quitting was the only option for me. Besides, I like my mother-in-law. She is a solid worker yet always well-dressed and can be best described as a lady of elegance. She is strict yet kind, like someone straight out of England. As someone who admires beauty, I respected my mother-in-law. Plus, I lost my parents early on. I didn't want to upset my mother-in-law, even if she was only related by marriage. My husband is tyrannical, and in our house, it's taken for granted that I do all the housework. He seriously believes that a wife should serve her husband. Seeing his mother, I can't understand how he could think that way. If I'm even slightly negligent with housework, he berates me. Don't neglect that housework, you idiot. Housework is a woman's job, and you can't even do that? You're beyond stupid. You're useless. Every day, my husband verbally abuses me at will. And it's not just me he berates. He sees his mother as an enemy. I wish that old hag would just drop dead. My husband wants to be the top at his company, but he can't achieve that because of my mother-in-law. It seems he views her presence as an obstacle. I'm sick of hearing him say such awful things every day. Honestly, I regret marrying him, but it was my own haste that was to blame. Still, the thought of severing ties with my mother-in-law was honestly unpleasant. But even with such a despicable man, I had resolved to stay married to him as long as my mother-in-law was around. However, in our second year of marriage, my husband started coming home extremely late. At first, he said it was due to overtime or meetings, but it was excessively late even for that. I became suspicious of my husband's clearly unusual behavior when he would come home late at night and head straight to the bath. When I checked his smartphone while he was bathing, as I suspected, he was having an affair. Moreover, the other woman appeared to be a young woman in her 20s working at the bar. I was able to find out where she worked from the information on his phone and pondered what to do next. I thought I could divorce him at this point, but doing so could mean losing my job and becoming a complete stranger to my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law is truly kind. Initially, my husband intended not to pay me for my work, assuming it was okay since I was family, but my mother-in-law sternly corrected him. Listen, Kristen is working in our house as a bride. It's shameful to make her work without pay despite that. My mother-in-law lectured my husband impressively. She knew how much I admired her, so she often invited me for coffee. I wanted to spend more time with her, enjoying coffee in her stylish coffee cups. Facing the risk of losing my husband, my job, and the mother-in-law I respected all at once, I couldn't make such a decision overnight. A few days later, when my husband was out and the company was closed, a call came in. It was from the hospital regarding my husband's health checkup. It seemed my mother-in-law was also called in. It was the familiar hospital of my in-laws. Arriving at the hospital, I met up with my mother-in-law. Wondering what it could be, we went to see the doctor together, and the doctor informed us that my husband had only 6 months to live. It was the same disease as my father-in-law. My mind went blank, and my mother-in-law looked downcast. It seems the chances of inheritance are low, but not zero, so we had requested a checkup together. To prevent my husband from becoming self-destructive upon hearing his prognosis, the family was informed first. How should I tell my husband? My mother-in-law offered to tell him, but she looked pained. She must have gone through this when announcing my father-in-law's time left. With that thought, I couldn't let my mother-in-law bear the burden of conveying a family member's limited time left. Maybe I should let him do as he pleases. Our relationship had grown cold, and he would probably want to spend more time with someone he loves. Besides, it seemed cruel to divorce a man with only half a year to live and demand compensation. With the insurance money from my husband and his remaining 6 months, I decided to let him live as he wished. Waiting for his return late that night, he finally came home. When I spoke to him, he seemed annoyed, saying, "I'm busy. If it's not important, you will regret it." So I replied seriously, "It's very important." Surprised by my tone, he stopped and I continued. "Today I was called by the hospital." "The hospital?" "Yes. Please calm down and listen. You've been given 6 months leave. You don't have much time left, so live as you wish." I intended to speak calmly, but in my haste, I only conveyed the conclusion. 6 months left to live? I see, understood. He said that and disappeared into the bedroom. I thought he must be shocked to learn about his short lifespan, but then he stopped coming home. We rarely saw each other at work, so I didn't even know if he was coming to the office. It couldn't be helped. I didn't want to see my weakened husband, and he probably didn't want to be seen either. However, my thinking was wrong. 1 month after the prognosis, numerous reminders arrived at home. They were for utilities like gas, water, and electricity. Shocked, I checked the bank account for automatic withdrawals, and it was at 0. This account was in my husband's name. Thinking it impossible, I checked the saving bank and a flex deposit, only to find them all cancelled or emptied. Even with a prognosis of only 6 months to live, this was going too far. I called my husband and screamed, "Where did you put all our savings?" Then he replied, "I spent it all on her, huh? You have life insurance anyway, huh?" What? I was shocked and lost for words. During that time, my husband revealed everything. He brought her a car and said that marrying me was the biggest thing on his life. He ranted, "I never thought you'd get a terminal diagnosis. I was right to get life insurance on you. Die soon, will you?" He said that and hung up the phone. He thought I was the one who had been given a terminal diagnosis and justified his spending because I didn't have long to live. The thought that I had decided to let him live his remaining life as he pleased made me want to kick myself. At that moment, I resolved to take revenge on my husband. Later, I went to my mother-in-law and told her everything. "I can't tolerate this anymore. I don't mind if I go to hell, and I'm prepared to be resented by you, mother-in-law. But still, I will take revenge on that man." My mother-in-law listened silently and then deeply bowed her head. "As his mother, I apologize to you. There's no way I could resent you." "But he's your only son, isn't he?" I thought it was natural for her to resent me for taking revenge on her son. No, I have no right to resent you. I raised him to be like Dad. Your anger and hatred justified. And you have the right to take revenge. Mother-in-law said she wanted him to live the rest of his life peacefully as he had less than 6 months to live. But knowing that he thought I had a terminal diagnosis and even wished for my early death, she couldn't consider him her son anymore. But I hope you will reconsider the divorce. If you do that, I can't be your mother anymore. Mother, I know it's presumptuous. I'm just a lonely old lady, but I hope you will continue to think of me as your mother. Her words made me want to cry. She assured me that she would spare no effort to make him pay for what he did. Things moved quickly from there. My husband thought I had no money left, but with my mother-in-law's support, I could hire a private detective and a lawyer. I wasn't sure how much compensation I could get from a dying husband, but they assured me they could arrange the divorce. Based on the evidence from the private detective, I first called the mistress. It seemed my husband had moved in with the mistress, but I told her, "Come along to the specified location. If you tell my husband or don't come along, I will take legal action." I hung up knowing full well I couldn't take any legal action, but she showed up alone at the cafe. "Are you his wife? You're just as terrible as James said. This is a threat. Struggling because he's about to die?" The mistress was a 29-year-old woman. I was appalled when I found out my husband was involved with a woman more than 10 years his junior, but seemed she only saw him as a money source. "So, you want the money back? Just so you know, I never asked for it. He gave me gifts on his own." "That's not the issue. I just came to warn you. Staying with him will only lead you to hell." I said that and left. I had come to see if she would be saddened to hear about my husband's terminal diagnosis, but it seemed there was no need to worry. Honestly, the mistress didn't matter to me. I was full of anger, but my mind was forced on punishing my husband. When I got home, to my surprise, my husband, whom I hadn't seen for months, returned home. Having been married for 2 years, I could tell he was clearly emaciated. Well, he always overdid it with alcohol and cigarettes, shortening his own life. Furious, my husband yelled, "Why aren't you dead yet? You were diagnosed with a terminal illness, and you dare to threaten my Cindy, you harlot." He was ranting and raving, out of breath, spitting saliva, and looked far from healthy. It had been 3 months since his terminal diagnosis. There wasn't much time left until his end. "Die? I can't. I'm healthy." "Huh? Don't tell me you lied about having a terminal illness." "No, I haven't lied. The one with the terminal illness is you, remember?" "Huh?" My husband seemed unable to grasp the situation, standing there with his mouth open, then started laughing derisively. "So, you've finally lost your mind, huh? You were always crazy. You better get in your coffin before you get any crazier. Looks like you'll be heading to the grave soon anyway." He didn't listen at all and kept insisting that I shouldn't mess with his mistress. I was just appalled and couldn't even argue. However, the next day, I received a call that my husband had collapsed and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. After contacting my mother-in-law, I headed to the hospital room where my husband was ranting. She knew about my terminal diagnosis and kept quiet. That's not what we agreed on. Please calm down. Shut up. Don't tell me what to do. My husband was uncontrollable and no one could approach him. But my mother-in-law walked in resolutely and slapped him. Such a shameful display from a grown man. This is what happens when you don't listen to others. You old hag, did you just hit me? Yes, and I'll do it again if necessary. Can't you understand with words? Neglecting your wife, playing around, and squandering all the savings. No one wants to hear what such a person has to say. She then turned on her heel and said, As a chairman, I'm firing you from the company. I'm also severing our parent-child relationship. What? What are you talking about? I'm your real son. My only child is Kristen. Let's go, Kristen. I actually have a villa. Let's live there for a while, shall we? My mother-in-law smiled at me happily, while my husband yelled, Come back, Kristen. You're my wife. I replied, As of today, I will be divorcing you, and left the hospital room. The lawyer I had contracted with came shortly after and demanded that my husband proceed with the divorce. He was uncontrollable and had to be restrained by several nurses. He couldn't talk that day, but later the lawyer got him to sign the divorce papers. The mistress disappeared without a trace afterward. My husband seemed genuinely in love with her, but was shocked and mentally broken by being used for money and having no one on his side. He became violent multiple times and ended up in a psychiatric ward. I found it scary that I think it's just his desires that he'll meet his end alone in an isolated room. My mother-in-law only paid for his hospitalization out of a final act of kindness, but nothing else. I'm staying at her villa, feeling somewhat tense in the luxurious house. Don't be tense. You're my daughter. You couldn't be selfish before, so feel free to be a little spoiled now. She smiled kindly at me. I hesitated but gathered the courage to say, Then, I'd like to have another coffee together. That's a great idea. Then we must buy some exceptionally delicious cakes. As I talked with my mother-in-law and saw her happy face, I felt genuine joy and laughed from the bottom of my heart for the first time in years.
Hey, how much did you inherit? I received a bank deposit with roughly $5 million in it, but... The husband grinned at the mention of $5 million. It's understandable to smile at such an amount, but it also seemed like he was plotting something. The next morning when I woke up, my husband was already gone. Had he gone out somewhere? He doesn't usually go for walks, and moreover, today he was off work. Maybe he wanted a break. Thinking so, I had breakfast alone and started cleaning the room. Then... What? Why? Why is it gone? The bank card that was definitely stored in the dresser was missing. Hey. The bank card is gone. Do you know anything about it? I called my husband in a panic. Maybe he had moved it somewhere else. That? I took care of it. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, I'm getting remarried, so we're getting divorced, okay? Wait, what do you mean? Just look. There's a divorce paper in the bedroom, right? Well, that's what it is. After telling me this, my husband unilaterally hung up the phone. Stealing the bank card, divorcing, and getting remarried. At that moment, I was about to explode with anger. Less than an hour later, my husband entered the front door in a panic. What are you doing here now? Hey, what's this all about? Why didn't you tell me? I see. That's what it is. I'll tell you everything. My name is Gina. I turned 50 this year. Being born into a relatively affluent family, as my father was the president of a major logistics company. I was dearly loved by my parents, being an only child. However, I was probably raised more strictly about money matters than other families. Listen, money can drive people crazy. You need to learn how to use money properly from a young age. That's what my father always said. Thanks to that, I started working part-time in high school and vowed to buy what I want with the money I earned myself, never begging my father for money. You're working hard on your part-time jobs, aren't you? You can rely on your dad sometimes. He'd be happy if his daughter relied on him. I was told something like this, but had no such intentions. And that didn't change even when I became a university student. Having grown up watching my father's work, I naturally found employment in the logistics industry as an adult. That's where I met my future husband, John. Good job, Gina. It's hot today, but let's do our best. My husband, 3 years my senior, always spoke to me with a kind voice whenever we met at work. Though as an office worker and as a truck driver, we only met a few times a day. Talking to him was something I always looked forward to. What a kind person he was. Gradually, I found myself attracted to his kind nature and, after a fierce pursuit, we started dating. Will you marry me? Yes. I look forward to our life together. 3 years into our relationship, we happily became husband and wife. Truly happy. When I received the proposal, I felt like I was the happiest person in the world. It was as if I was under the illusion of being on top of the world. 25 years have passed since I married my husband. We were blessed with 2 sons, Eric and Paul, and lived happily until one day. My husband's attitude began to change dramatically. Last year, on our wedding anniversary, it was customary for the whole family to go out for a meal together. But that day my husband said for the first time that he couldn't go. I can't make it this year. What? Why? I have work that day. I just can't get out of it. It's understandable if it's work, but since I quit my job when we got married, I really have no way of knowing if it's true. However, my husband, who usually doesn't lie, said so. It's sad that we can't celebrate our anniversary together. But I told him I understood and decided to go out for a meal with our sons. On the day of our anniversary, respecting our younger son's wish, we went to a fancy Italian restaurant place about 30 minutes away from our home by car. This is awesome. The pasta we have at home from the supermarket is nothing compared to this. Stop it. You're embarrassing me. While enjoying a rare family meal, I thought I saw a figure resembling my husband outside the restaurant. John. Mom, what's wrong? I thought it was my husband for a moment, but decided it must have been my imagination. No, it's nothing. He was arm in arm with a young woman, looking quite close. It must have been my mistake. Even after returning home, I couldn't stop thinking about my husband. Doing chores around the house, I couldn't help but wonder if he might be cheating. I'm home. Tired from today's work. Welcome back. You must be tired from work. My husband returned home in his work clothes looking no different than usual. However, he smelled unusually nice, and despite the hot weather, he didn't seem to sweat much. After he took a shower and had dinner, I decided to ask him directly. Hey. What's up? It might be weird to ask this, but were you really at work today? Upon my asking, my husband froze for a moment. Yeah. I was at work, But why do you ask? Because when the kids and I went out for Italian at noon, I saw someone who looked like you walking outside with a woman. What? Are you saying I was out playing with some woman instead of working? No, that's not what I meant. This makes me sick. I'm going to sleep. I ended up upsetting my husband, and we didn't speak for the rest of the day. Something was clearly off. Could he really be cheating? The next day, his mood hadn't changed, and our conversations became noticeably less. After a year of this strained atmosphere, one day, while my husband was in the bath, I noticed his mobile phone on the living room table. I knew it was wrong to snoop through someone's phone, but I couldn't stop myself. Fortunately, or unfortunately, his phone wasn't locked, and I could immediately see text exchanges and photos. What is this? The phone contained exchanges and photos with a woman who seemed to be his affair partner. This confirmed my husband's infidelity. You're cheating, aren't you? I blurted out to my husband, unable to keep silent any longer. I couldn't bear the thought of him doing such things behind my back. Huh? What are you talking about? I have proof. I showed him his phone, challenging him. But he didn't seem bothered and snatched the phone from me, saying, "What are you talking about? I would never cheat. This girl is just a clerk at the office. She often asks me to take pictures. Being popular is such a hassle." His flippant remark infuriated me. Maybe he was telling the truth, but I had my doubts about him, but for some reason, I let it go and didn't pursue it further. Half a year later. Gina. It's terrible. Come to the hospital quickly. Your father. What happened? Calm down. What about Dad? He was hit by a car. He might not make it. The call from my mother was shocking. He might not make it. My heart raced as I drove to the hospital, considering running every red light in my urgency. Please, God, save my father's life. I prayed as I arrived and rushed to his hospital room. Dad. Entering the room, I found my mother crying and my father lying motionless, covered with a white sheet. Gina, your dad has. Wait, this must be a joke. Dad. Dad. My desperate calls were in vain. My father would not wake up. He had been hit by a car, suffering severe injuries that likely killed him instantly. His body was covered in bruises, but fortunately, his face remained unscathed, making it seem like he was just sleeping. We took my father's body back to our family home in a coffin, and immediately started planning the funeral. I informed my husband and children of his death and asked them to attend the funeral. Many people, including colleagues and longtime acquaintances of my father, attended the funeral all the next day. Realizing how much my father was loved made me tear up again. The funeral went smoothly, and we were able to send my father off to heaven without any issues. I'm sorry to bring this up at a time like this. It's about inheritance. She approached me with a bank account stuffs in hand as we were leaving the funeral service. What's this? Your father's will. He said to give this to you if anything happened to him. Looking inside the documents, I saw a balance of $5 million. $5 million. According to my mother, I had never relied on my father for money. However, he had been depositing money every month for me, just in case something happened. So that's what he was doing. Thank you. I gratefully accepted the bank card and other records, and went home with my husband and children. The next day, I promptly went to the bank to transfer the funds into my name. Leaving such a large sum, the inheritance tax won't be negligible. Thinking about this, I returned home and stored the bank card in my dresser. That night, my husband, who had recently been distant, finally spoke to me. Hey, you were talking about inheritance with your mother. When we were leaving the funeral, right? How much did you get? I was given a bank card with about $5 million in it. Huh? So, that's how it is. The husband smirked. Hearing about the $5 million seemed to satisfy him. And he headed to the bedroom with a grin on his face. What's with that? Is he just happy about the money, or is it something else? I couldn't shake the feeling that he was up to no good. The next day, when I woke up, my husband was already gone. He doesn't usually go for walks early in the morning. And he wasn't supposed to work today. Where could he have gone? Well, maybe he just needed some time off. With that thought, I had breakfast alone and started cleaning my room. It's gone. Why? I definitely put it here yesterday. When I opened the drawer to organize my clothes, the bank card that was supposed to be there until yesterday was nowhere to be found. Maybe my husband had put them somewhere else. In a panic, I called my husband. Hey, do you know where the bank card went? I had it stored away yesterday. The bank card. I took care of it. Did you notice the divorce papers I left in the bedroom? We're getting a divorce. I was dumbfounded by my husband's sudden declaration of divorce. Divorce. What are you talking about? Let's make it quick. That's what I'm saying. I'm getting remarried. After saying that, my husband hung up the phone unilaterally. This is outrageous. After everything I've done for him. I was so angry I felt like I might lose my mind. Fine. If that's how you want it, I'll show you what I can do. Having completely lost patience with my husband, I vowed to get my revenge. After hanging up the phone with my husband, I started thinking about how to get back at him. Surely he would try to withdraw the money from the bank account. With that thought, I immediately called the bank and reported the bank card as lost. This should prevent anyone but me from withdrawing money. I also submitted divorce papers to the municipal office. Around 11 a.m., I heard noisy sounds and my husband's voice coming from the entrance. Hey, Gina. What the hell is this all about? He left on his own, and now this? I didn't feel like dealing with him, but I reluctantly went to the entrance. What do you mean? I don't understand what you're saying. Why can't I withdraw money from this bank card? I have PIN and everything. So, it was about that. Just as I thought. Well, of course. I told the bank I lost the bank card. Huh? He looked at me, eyes wide in surprise. But, I called, so I should still be able to withdraw money, right? I have the bank card and PIN. Does this man not know basic common sense? Or is he so blinded by another woman that he'd do something like this? Well, it doesn't matter anymore. Basically, the bank allows withdrawals with just the bank card and PIN, yes. But, when you report a card or bank card lost, they require identification documents from the account holder. Why didn't you tell me something so important? This is a mess. I've already started talking about buying a house. I see. That's what this is about. He thought he could steal from the $5 million bank deposit and set up a new home with his mistress. Just so you know, even if you managed to withdraw it, that money wouldn't be yours. What are you talking about? I have a right to the inheritance, don't I? There's no way that's happening. The only ones with inheritance rights are my mother and me, as the spouse. Upon hearing this, my husband's shoulders slumped in disappointment. So, can't I get at least half? I wish he would stop talking nonsense. After all, he's the one who brought up divorce, and yet he remains so selfish. What? No way. We're already divorced. divorce can be cancelled anytime. It's impossible. I've already submitted the paperwork to the city hall. Even so, we should be able to divide the property. He continues to frustrate me to no end. Reaching my limit, I raised my voice at my husband. Enough already. An inheritance split? There's no way that's happening. You were the one who wanted a divorce because of your affair. And you were the one who unilaterally handed over a divorce paper without discussing any terms. We are strangers now. Shocked by my sudden outburst, my husband became silent, looking down. He must have thought he had a chance talking about property division. But there was no chance at all. If you still want to talk about dividing property, let's continue this in court. I'm ready to fight as much as you want. You're going to lose, and I'll make sure to get every last penny of compensation. No, that's not. Then leave. And never show your face here again. I pushed my husband's body, shoving him out the door. I expected him to resist or make a scene at the entrance, but he just walked away quietly. Mom? What happened? My yelling must have woken my eldest son, who came out rubbing his eyes. I told my son about his father's affair and that it led to our divorce. That's what happened. I'm sorry. So that's it. I'm fine with it. I never liked Dad much anyway. Paul and I will help around the house. Don't overdo it, Mom. Tears flowed from my eyes at my son's kindness. 2 weeks later, I consulted a lawyer. My husband claimed that the woman was a coworker. But it turned out to be a lie. He met her at a bar. He apologized to me, crying, saying, I never intended to marry her. I couldn't help but laugh at that. In the end, it seemed my husband had deluded himself into thinking he could marry his mistress. Betraying his family and acting selfishly had finally caught up to him. I felt completely justified in my feelings towards my husband. A month later, in the peaceful home now without my husband, my second son handed me a letter. This was in the post box. There's no sender's name, but it's addressed to you. I wonder what it is. Thank you. Recognizing my ex-husband's handwriting immediately, the letter read, I'm truly sorry for having an affair and not considering my family. It happened because I got carried away with a girl I met at a bar that I visited with a coworker. I've avoided jail by pleading a first offense, but I deeply regret my actions. I've lost my job and am now working earnestly every day at a construction company that used to do business with us. If you can forgive me, I'd like to start over with everyone. If you're willing, please call me. Sigh. What is he thinking now? I have no intention of getting back together with my ex-husband. I threw the letter in the trash and went back to watching TV. Though the stolen bank card was never recovered, I went to the bank to have them reissued, so my father's precious inheritance is safe. I plan to use it carefully for my children's future.